Vitally important debate going on in the country right now, and it's not about statues or even the alt-right and Antifa. It's about America's institutions and whether they are worth preserving. Radicals on the left want to tear it all down, as they did the statue in Durham yesterday. Equality under the law, protections for the individual against the mob, the absolute right to say and believe anything you choose. Those will be gone, replaced by something darker and more rigidly conformist. Is that a country you want to live in? If it's not, now's the time to speak up. Our elites are refusing to. They're too afraid. John Daniel Davidson is a senior correspondent at The Federalist, and he joins us tonight. John, this does seem like a turning point somehow, not just on the right, but also on the left, these events of the last 2 days, and there seems to be a new intensity on the left. Am I imagining that?
No, you're not. And we do seem like we're at a turning point, but this has been coming down the pike for a number of years. I remember 2 years ago, we had the 150th anniversary of the Confederate surrender at Appomattox, and you had people in the mainstream media at that time calling for the desecration of Confederate graves, not just tearing down statues, but digging up remains, removing them, bulldozing over cemeteries. And this iconoclastic impulse is native to the left. This is what China's Cultural Revolution was all about. If you want to see where tearing down statues by mobs will get you, look at pictures of China's Cultural Revolution where they tore down statues, exactly right. Temples, the whole thing, even stomping on them.
But Mao did that, and the Khmer Rouge did that, and the Taliban did that in Afghanistan for political reasons. I mean, look, I'm not naturally, for whatever it's worth, not very sympathetic to the Confederacy. I'm an American, and I'm against insurrections, period. So, but it's not about that. The people who are attacking these statues know nothing about history. They don't know who Robert E. Lee was. They don't know who Stonewall Jackson was. They're trying to delegitimize the U.S. government and the traditions of American society because they don't believe in them. I mean, this is transactional. They're doing this to achieve a goal that has nothing to do with the Civil War.
Yeah, that's right. And I think a lot of people on the right, conservatives on the right who are saying, yes, maybe we should move these statues to a museum, miss the point. This is not about the Confederacy. Exactly. This is not about the Civil War. This is about political power, and it's about a small group of people on the left trying to exert outsized influence on American politics by following in the footsteps of Mao, of the armed thugs in the Weimar Republic, of the Taliban. This is these are tactics that are well known. You start by tearing down statues and burning books, and eventually you go after people.
One of the ironies of all of this, and it's been interesting to watch on a split screen, left and right fighting each other, horrifying, but also instructive. One of the things I don't like about some of these white supremacist groups is that race is at the center of their worldview. And I don't want to live in a world where race is at the center of the worldview. But I see the same on the left. I see people with signs attacking white supremacy, or it's always about race for them as well. They seem every bit as race-obsessed and angry as the people they're fighting. But don't acknowledge that for some reason.
This is what happens with with identity politics. If you push identity politics, eventually you get around to identity politics for white people, which is a dangerous thing in a country that has a huge white majority. And this is why the left has been sowing these seeds of what's happening now for a long time. Are they surprised that eventually some white people are going to say, yeah, let's do identity politics, and we're going to have white identity politics? It's all poisonous garbage.
No, but this is the terminus. This is the end. What do you think happens when you force people to line up by their immutable characteristics, by race? You think you're not going to wind up with every group doing that? Of course you are. This is what identity politics looks like on left and right. Why does nobody make that point?
And it's totally un-American, too. America is not about ethnicity. It's not about national origin. It's about creed. And there's no place in the American constitutional system for identity politics, left or right. Plain and simple.
Thank you for saying that. You'll probably be attacked as something for doing so, but I'm glad you did. John, thank you.
Thanks.
Rioters in Durham, North Carolina destroyed a war memorial yesterday, and police simply stood by and watched it happen. Local governments are not keeping order in the streets for some reason. The chattering classes don't care. They're more concerned with rolling back free speech rights for the population. than in protecting us from disorder. Why is that the case? We'll try to get to the bottom of it. Also, President Obama's biggest program for illegal immigrants turns 5 years old today. We've got a cake. We'll talk to a supporter of that program up ahead.
Tucker Carlson.
Rioters in the city of Durham, North Carolina, destroyed a statue honoring Confederate war dead. They pulled it down yesterday while cops stood by and did nothing. Well, you'd think the government allowing policy decisions to be made by mob violence would be a big concern among liberals. It's not a good precedent to set, but they don't seem bothered at all. Instead, a top priority on the left right now is securing a rollback of free speech rights for you and me. One thing the president said today deserves more attention than it will likely get. Yesterday, a mob tore down a Civil War soldiers' memorial in Durham, North Carolina. Police stood idly by, and liberals across the country applauded it. Which statues are next, the president asked today? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson? It's not a joke. Suddenly, it's a serious question. Thomas Jefferson indisputably was a great man. He was the author of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, and maybe most importantly, the greatest thinker in American political history. All of us live in his shadow. Unfortunately, however, Jefferson was also a slaveholder. That's real. It's a moral taint. We ought to remember it. But to the fanatics on the left, it means that Jefferson must be purged from public memory forever. The demands are already coming that we do that. In 2015, students at the University of Missouri demanded the removal of a Jefferson statue. 2 years ago, on CNN, anchor Ashley Banfield suggested the Jefferson Memorial in Washington might have to go. Needless to say, there is literally no limit when you start thinking like this. Last year, hundreds of activists in New York demanded the statue of Theodore Roosevelt at the American Natural History Museum be dismantled. They argued that Roosevelt was a racist. If that's the standard, nobody is safe. Watch out, Abraham Lincoln, you're next. Now, to be clear, as if it's necessary, slavery is evil. If you believe in the rights of the individual, it's actually hard to think of anything worse than slavery. But let's be honest, up until 150 years ago, when a group of brave Americans fought and died to finally put an end to it, slavery was the rule rather than the exception around the world, and had been for thousands of years, sadly. Plato owned slaves. So did Muhammad, peace be upon him. Many African tribes held slaves and sold them. The Aztecs did too. Before he liberated Latin America, Simon Bolivar owned slaves. Slaveholding was so common among the North American Indians that the Cherokee brought their slaves with them on the Trail of Tears. And it wasn't something they learned from the European settlers. Indians were holding and trading slaves when Christopher Columbus arrived. And by the way, he owned slaves too. Now, none of this is a defense of the atrocity of human bondage. It is an atrocity. The point, however, is that if we're going to judge the past by the standards of the present, if we're going to reduce a person's life to the single worst thing he ever participated in, we had better be prepared for the consequences of that. And here's why. 41 of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence held slaves. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, had a plantation full of slaves. George Mason, the father of the Bill of Rights, also owned slaves, unfortunately. But does that make what they wrote illegitimate? If these men were simply racist villains, and that's all they were, then the society they created is as evil as they were. There's no reason to respect its traditions or uphold its laws. The First Amendment, for example, the right to speak freely. For hundreds of years, Americans have revered it. Now the left dismisses it as the work of white supremacist slaveholders. It is worthless, they tell us. It must go. It is now routine to hear liberals claim that hate speech, whatever that is, isn't protected by the First Amendment, though, of course, the whole point of the First Amendment is to protect speech that offends people. It's a statement of shocking ignorance, and yet it is now common. CNN's Chris Cuomo said it. He's supposedly a lawyer at Pomona College in tonight. Richard Painter, great to see you. You're a smart man. I know we went to the same high school. I've known you for a long time. I saw these tweets, and my first thought was, Richard Painter has a solution that he's keeping from the rest of us. And so I'm inviting you on tonight to tell us what it is.
Well, I don't think anybody's going to come up with a solution that's going to eliminate all gun violence, but we have a lot of it. This keeps happening. At a minimum, we ought to have information on people like Mr. Paddock, who are acquiring dozens of weapons over a very short period of time. It amazes me that the police didn't know that he was acquiring that many weapons over such a short period of time.
Okay,
that
so let's stop there. So since you're a law professor, I know that you can handle specific questions. How many weapons in what period of time should trigger a visit to your house from authorities?